What's up? It's Bucky Brooks. It's your favorite Jaguar. We're doing a Bleav in Jags podcast, but technically it's not a Bleav in Jags podcast. It's a crossover podcast because these two fan bases, these two organizations have so much crossover appeal that we thought it'd be great to have Bob Papa and Carl Banks jump on from Bleav in Giants to talk about just some similarities between these two organizations. So, fellas, how you guys doing?
Doing good, Buck. How are you, man?
Man, I'm good. So before I jumped on your guys' last part, we were sharing stories and I was telling stories about how the Giants have always kind of been a part of my household. Obviously, growing up in North Carolina, being a Tar Heel fan, Lawrence Taylor was like one of the guys that I looked up to. So we would always follow the Giants in passing, particularly my dad. And so it's funny that now that we've decided to link up, I just think about all the parallels and crossovers. And one, because I know the Giants just had their 100-year celebration. You guys had
Mhm.
all the greats there. I think we have to at least start there, knowing the impact that Tom Coughlin had on the Jaguars and how he got a lot of the stuff that he learned from Parcells and the Giants and then paid it back by getting two Super Bowls. So just talk about a little bit of that celebration.
Well, I mean, Bob was the maestro of the show, but from where I sat, man, it was special because to see generations of giant players and champions come together, and you see that common thread. But then you get a chance to really talk about the impact that coaches have in your life, and there's Tom Coughlin. And then there's Bill Parcells, who Tom was on Bill's staff, and it was just a great moment for me just to be there, and just knowing what those guys, those coaches meant, and what the things that they were teaching, the attention to details, and that was Tom, even as an assistant coach. It's like his attention to detail was just impeccable, and you come to appreciate that because those are the little things that champions are made of.
Bucky, the cool thread that I felt from the whole process was the connections to the past. People forget that Strahan, his rookie season, played on a team that had Lawrence Taylor and Phil Simms that made it to a postseason. And then we went further back in time and we were talking with George Martin, who was drafted in the mid 70s, and Harry Carson in 76, and Brian Kelly in 1973, great players for the Giants in that era. And they had on their coaching staff, arguably, till this day, maybe the greatest left tackle of all time in Roosevelt Brown. So he was on the coaching staff and part of the scouting staff. And Emlyn Tennell, who is maybe one of the great defensive backs of all time, still holds the Giants record for most interceptions. And I think in two separate seasons, he had more interception return yards and punt return yards than teams had leading rushers. His nickname was Mr. Offense on Defense. First African-American player ever voted to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So these guys had touched those guys, and it went all the way up to Victor Cruz. So the thread was pretty remarkable, which kind of made the night really special.
It's funny because you guys talk about Coach Coughlin being so detail oriented and those things. And I remember playing for Coach Coughlin in the mid 90s and how he kind of carried some of that Parcell stuff with him in terms of the toughness, the way he called players out. He made it very uncomfortable and those things. So I want to kind of lean into you guys because you guys know everything Giants lore. When you think about Bill Parcells and his impact, what do you think his influence was on Tom Coughlin's coaching style and leadership ability as he went forward from the Giants to the Jags and back to the Giants?
So if you would know Mike Quick, I'm sure you know Mike Quick. Mike Quick tells stories about Tom Coughlin trying to coach him as a wide receiver and literally teaching him everything as if he were a rookie. And Quick wasn't a rookie, but that was the Tom Coughlin pre-Bill Parcells, right? And then when he got in with Bill, Tom was always detail-oriented, but the impact that Bill Parcells had on Tom was all the other things that went into coaching that prepared him how to deal with players. Because Tom only had one way, and I don't know how much he changed it, but
Never.
he was able to adapt a little bit. But for Bill Parcells, sometimes he was very intentional about being a butthole. Other times he wasn't, and he knew there would be incoming back at him if he dished it. But he expected it because he kind of understood the two-way give of coach, player, and motivation, right? Tom didn't necessarily have the same types of interactions in real time with his players, right? He can go at you and, his players may sulk or whatever, and Tom is on to the next thing until, somebody points out to him that you might want to have a conversation. And that's when he kind of changed his style and they went on to win that Super Bowl. But just the way you interact with players was kind of a Bill Parcells trait, in getting information in real time and making adjustments. Tom was always good at that, but just not on the motivation side. He knew one way, and that was the way to do it. But just the way Parcells could take information, game time information in real time, or the evaluation process of one play to the next play in practice, and to really make some adjustments or be able to call things out. I think Tom was masterful at that.
So when we talk about,
well,
go
Bucky,
ahead,
just to add to that, this was, I think, something Tom learned under Parcells was, and other guys that were on the staff have told me the same thing. It's like they'd be in these staff meetings and a assistant coach would be complaining about player X or player Y, and he can't do this and why he can't do that. And, Parcells' messaging, which I think Tom carried over, is, well, then that's on you. Coach him better. And don't tell me what he can't do. Tell me what he does really well. And let's use that. Let's use that player. And the other thing that I think Tom learned from Bill is testing people. So I started on the pre and post game show with the Giants in '88. And I think the first couple of years at FDU Madison training camp, Parcells would never even look at me or answer a question that I asked. And it was intentional because he was doing his version of hazing. And then Coughlin did a different version of it when he came to the Giants. We would tape these TV shows, and it would be like Bruce Beck was doing them at the time, and Coach wanted to tape them in the morning. So at 7:30, so the whole crew gets there at 6:45, sets up the studio, and Coughlin would intentionally come 5 minutes earlier and 5 minutes earlier, to the point where the production crew was getting in at 5:30 because Tom was walking in at 6:45 to do something that was originally scheduled for 6:30. But he tests you, and then once you win his trust, then it's a whole different ballgame.
It's funny because you guys talk about Bill Parcells, and I know Bill Parcells was very influential on the general manager for the Jaguars, Trent Baalke. And one of the things that I've heard from the Giants, I've talked to Giants scouts, and they talked about George Young talking about, because we're the Giants, we're about bigger, faster, stronger. And I know when it comes to Trent Baalke, he also is a big believer in the height, weight, speed thing and the size. So, Carl, when you played on those decorated teams of the Giants and you looked around, was that a difference? Was it about kind of building a heavyweight champion so you guys could kind of impose your will on the opponents? Because Trent Baalke is certainly trying to fall into that mode.
Yeah, I think we were bigger, stronger, faster, and smarter, right? Like the height, weight, speed thing was one thing, but our number one requirement was to be smart. Like we were literally, our linebacking crew we were basketball players, all of us basketball players, who happened to be very physical, tough-minded guys, but we had to be very smart. Like to play for Bill, like if you had limitations, but you did something well, you would be good, right? But the old saying is, the more you could do, the more they ask of you. That was our group. And Bill just kept adding more and more to the plate. And I think when you see the evolution of the greatness of Bill Belichick, it's in part from being on that staff and learning that, hey, if you get smart players who can play, you can give them more and more, and you're going to evolve how you can do things and how you can approach every game from week to week, because you don't get pigeonholed. And so we were just smart enough, the core group of us that were out there, to do whatever they asked us to do. Like if you said to me that I couldn't play will linebacker or off-ball linebacker, middle linebacker, whatever, on nickel or dime, I would be like, I got to learn how to do it. Because Belichick said, okay, when we're in meetings and they would draw responsibilities, and if you're fifth on the depth chart, he would call out the fifth guy on the depth chart and say, so-and-so just went down, this guy is suspended, this guy broke his leg, you're in. And he puts a call up on the board, and you got to go answer and know what that responsibility is. And it's not the first and second guy, it might be the fourth guy, right? But when you're in the room with the group that we were with, we knew everybody's position. Everybody's, from cornerback to free safety, and they knew all of ours, because he's like, we can blitz anybody, and if you know what the other guy is doing, I'm not going to put you in a bad spot, but I might put cover 3 out there and make you drop way out and it's in my corner on a blitz. I mean, it was so many of those things. So we had to learn how to do it. And then the other part about it that Bill Parcells was very good at, I guess with the exception of Lawrence, everybody had to be fundamentally sound. Like Lawrence just could get it done because he saw the game so much different. But if we were in run-on-one drills, he got coached like the rest of us. And if it required a right shoulder or left shoulder, he did it, right? So he knew the fundamentals, but, there were very few times where he literally had to use it, And I just told the story to Jordan Raanan yesterday over lunch about how our playbook constantly evolved. And, with Lawrence Taylor, he was asking me, he's like, so how did they handle Lawrence? How did you coach him? Did he follow? Did he freelance? I'm like, whatever he did became part of the playbook the very next play. And he's like, what do you mean? And I gave him an example. We were in Washington. No, we were playing Washington in the championship game. And that game, I'm supposed to follow Donnie Warren, their tight end. So Lawrence would always switch back and forth. So Joe Gibbs knew that, and it was always a chess game. So Joe Gibbs would wait until the last second to motion his tight end towards Lawrence, so Lawrence couldn't come back around. So he decided to do the yo-yo motion. He sent the tight end over, then sent him back. Right now he's thinking he's going to get me to run back. Lawrence said, stay right here. He said, if he moves again, stay right here. So now they got us unbalanced, but it's me and Lawrence, and he looked at me and said, rush. So we both rushed on Joe Jacoby, and they had never seen it before, but this was Lawrence. Like, he had already deciphered what they were trying to do. He's like, he said to me, he's going to go back over, but you stay here. And so we come off, we made the play. We come off to the sideline. Belichick said, what is that? And Lawrence told him it became a play in our playbook. And it was one of those deals where the ability to make the adjustment was the beautiful part about Belichick and Parcells, because Parcells said, what the hell was that? And Bill goes to explain to him what it was. And so he tells Belichick, now you got to balance this up so that if they catch us like that again, they don't run it. So Belichick, this is in real time. He gets everybody together. He says, okay, we're going to call this over cover 2 LT or something like that. He says, but he tells our middle linebacker, before the snap count, shift the line away from Lawrence and Carl. So now they shift over. Now they can't run that side because we just shifted our defensive end out, and we got a soft edge, Lawrence and I. So it was genius the way these guys worked. But this is, guys always being able to make adjustments and in real time put players in the best positions possible. And I know I'm being long-winded here, but if I will, I just saw something from Tom Brady, right? He's talking about quarterbacks. And he said something, and I knew exactly where it came from. He said, you know, how quarterbacks develop. He says, when I get to the line of scrimmage, I need to know the one or two things that can hurt me in this play.
Yeah.
That was Bill Belichick. When he put in a defense, and this started in like OTAs or training camp, he put something in. He said, this is the only play that can hurt us. If this play hurts us, it should only gain 20 yards max because we'll have a guy that could get to him by then. Every single defense we had, he would tell us who our most vulnerable player was, but he's only vulnerable if they can get to this type of play, which, you know, we were good enough where most times teams couldn't get it. And if they did, he would tell us the maximum they should get on this play is X. And that's when Brady's talking about, if I see blitz, I know that there's two plays I could be in. And if they hit it just right, then maybe it's an incomplete. I forget how he was talking about it, but
but he did talk about that.
Talking about mitigating the downside of any play by just knowing, being knowledgeable of what could happen in certain situations. And situational football was just the hallmark of how we played.
So unbelievable. Papa, when you watch that and you hear those conversations about like Bill Parcells' influence, obviously Bill Belichick and those guys, and then the smart thing, like what comes to mind for you, like in all the Giants teams that you've seen and all the football that you've seen in general?
Well, just kind of like circling it back to Coach Coughlin, you know, in his time with the Giants, the imprint of what Carl just talked about remained in existence with Spags as the defensive coordinator, creating this NASCAR package and figuring out these ways to out leverage the opposition. And there was never a game when Coughlin was the head coach between 2004. Obviously, his last year was 2015, but the roster, due to horrible drafts, had started to deteriorate. But even then, the Giants, in 2015, the Giants had the worst defense they've ever had in the history of their franchise. And they set an NFL record for most games lost in the last 2 minutes. They were still in these games because you never felt that when you were standing there on the sideline and you were watching the game from the press box, that a Tom Coughlin team was not going to be outcoached ever, which is why he was able to beat Belichick in Super Bowl 42. He ended the Patriots' win streak in Foxborough in 2011 in the regular season, beat him in the Super Bowl that year, and with arguably the worst defense in the history of the Giants, they're a dropped interception away in 15 from beating them at Giants Stadium because he gave the team that edge that kind of goes right from what Carl was talking about, and that's that thread that goes through.
You know, it's funny. So, and thinking about the thread that goes through, so many threads that go through the Jaguars and the Giants when it comes to comparison. I heard Carl talk about like at that celebration, he had an opportunity to see like LT maybe talking to Kayvon Thibodeaux. And and some of the other pass rushers saying tips. So when I look at the Giants and the Jags, I see similarities in a few different areas. So one, we talk about Kayvon Thibodeaux. He is a young pass rusher in his third year, like looking to come into his own. Well, the Jags have one and Travon Walker, who's also looking to go to the next level. So I'm asking you two questions because you then have the premier rushers in Josh Allen and then Brian Burns coming over. So Carl, being on the field and you've been around maybe the greatest pass rusher ever, what are the traits that you're looking for to determine whether a pass rusher is really that next level pass rusher?
You know, it's one of these things, you see it when you see it, right? And that is, you know, there are guys that are very explosive. They're like a guy like Brian Burns. I call him a no contact football player. He doesn't like contact, but in a good way. Like he never lets anything get to his body.
Kind of like OC.
You know, it's like OC Umeor. Like good footwork, very fast hands, but knows how, he can bend and turn. And I don't have all the, the jargon that the scouts use, but he can get to the quarterback, right? What are next level type guys? You can look at them and just say, okay, wow, he's got something. right? Oh, wait a minute, he can finish. That's the other part. Can he finish? Does he have a motor when the ball's not at him, or does he just turn it on when the ball is when it's a pass play to his side or something like that? But the traits I look for is good hands, good footwork, and just good high football IQ by watching a guy, knowing he's got good football IQ. And I say that when it comes to Brian Burns, because when I'm looking at the film on this guy, like nobody ever gets into his body, but yet he's not a physical player.
Yeah.
Right. He's just, I call him a non-contact defensive end because he doesn't let a lot of people get into him. He's long. And when I tell you, I looked at an entire season just to find whatever his flaws were, right? Like he hustles, he's smart, and I'm like, okay, he's just that type of player who can just get it done, but he's not the most physical. He doesn't bull rush a lot of people, but he can keep people off of his body while moving. And that makes a great pass rusher. But then you have guys, like a Von Miller, who's great first step. He's shot out of a cannon. He's more of of the late Derek Thomas,
Yeah.
style, right? But a little bigger, right? So you have those, and then you have the guy in Pittsburgh, not Pittsburgh, in Cleveland.
Oh, Myles Garrett.
Myles Garrett is more like a Bruce Smith. I don't know if he finishes like Bruce Smith, because I think Bruce was probably the best finisher of any defensive end I know. But you just kind of see how they approach it, and they just are very domineering in their approach and how they play every single down.
It's funny because looking at because all these guys are very similar, right? There's gonna be immense amount of pressure on Burns to deliver based on the contract, just like with Josh Allen. Much like you described Brian Burns, Josh Allen can be described in that way because it's not all force, it's more finesse, but he finds a way to get it done. It's not, hey, I'm contact adverse, but I just find a way to slither my way through to get to it. I think the contrasting styles of Kayvon Thibodeaux and Travon Walker are interesting though, because Kayvon Thibodeaux is from out my way in LA. Watched him in high school, first at Dorsey High School, then at Oaks Christian. You see him go. To me, I always felt like he was underrated in terms of what he could potentially bring to the table, compared to Travon Walker, who is more the physical specimen who just kind of beats you up in a He-Man fashion. Talk about that, because you like to think that pass rusher is going to be more forceful than finesse, but it appears that Kayvon Thibodeaux has kind of found his way, being a real finesse, smooth athlete coming off the edge.
Yeah, so Kayvon Thibodeaux, I think, is in the way I see it, a late bloomer. Like I don't even think he's hit puberty yet.
Oh, his body
as
type.
A football player in football terms.
Yeah.
But no, just in his skill set. His body type, he's looking better, but in terms of his football ascension, skill set ascension, I don't think he's hit puberty, because you see something different in him the more knowledge he gets, right? If I have a conversation with him and say, I don't think you're as strong on your left side as you are on your right side versus the run, he'll work on it, right? And all of a sudden he figures out, damn, I could be really good on this. And now he's ambidextrous when it comes to playing either run or pass. He can do it from both sides. So he's the guy, he's the typical sponge, right? I don't know what type of program he came from in high school. Was it a big or small? But it seems like the more exposure he gets, the better he is. It's like he applies it right away. So it's like he hasn't even gotten close. I don't think he scratched the surface as to what he could be. You can see guys and tell what they are, and they're going to be that for a while. You know what he is today, but tomorrow he might be even better than that. And I mean, because if you'd have been in the room and you watched him and Lawrence Taylor interact, right? He's soaking it all in, but he's asking a few questions here or there. And I'm there, and he says to me, he's like, so, what's your superpower? What was your superpower?
Yeah.
I was like, I was prepared. I watched film, and I told him how I approached film study, right? And he's like, so did you look at tendencies or did you look at a certain player? And I said, yeah, that happened. But for me, I wanted to feel the rhythm of a game. So I would watch film for the first hour and a half, not looking at anybody and just waiting for something to pop out. And then you kind of understand how teams want to run their offense. And he was like, yeah. I said, and then you can start to narrow in on what your responsibilities are. But once you get a cadence or a feel for how teams want to run their offense, there are certain things that you're going to do in the game because you felt it, because you had already studied how they want to do it. And he was like, oh, okay. So I'm sure he took note of that and is probably going to start to apply that as well, so.
Papa, when you hear that, because you've been around so many great pass rushers up there in New York, like, what do you think about that whole conversation? Like the premier pass rusher in Burns, Kayvon Thibodeaux, like the contrast between young and old pass rushers and how they go about doing their business.
I think it's, the Giants are really lucky, right? Because there's a lot of former Giants that are in the building on a regular basis.
Oh, wow.
Whether it's in training camp or guys that work for us, whether it was David Deal for a long time and Sean O'Hara's in the building and Strahan pops in every now and then and Harry Carson's in and out of the building. Carl's in the building a lot. And I think there's a lot of picking of the brain. Amani Toomer's around with the receivers, not working with them, but just in the cafeteria.
Always around. It's always around.
Just making a point. And I think that's one of the really cool things about it. Again, we talked about that thread that's kind of run across here over the course of time. And I think that, it's great to hear things from your coaches, but like Carl, you would love to just spend a little time in a film room with Isaiah Simmons.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because he's a guy that,
talented.
Has been kind of miscast. He did some really good things last year, but, to kind of pick his brain in the film room, I think the players kind of get that opportunity. Tuck's around a lot. OC comes flying in. OC brought some of those guys over to Nigeria to do a camp thing. So I think the tradition and sort of just the handing down of nuggets is something that kind of runs through it, which is why they've had this continuous run of edge rushers over the years.
So, Bucky, I wanted to ask you, because as we weave this thing with, someone like Tom Coughlin, who started that franchise in Jacksonville, and was able to get one of the greatest tackles of his time, and it's probably going to go down as one of the all-time greats, Tony Baselli, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he had, Mark Brunell, he had Fred Taylor, Keenan McCardell, and it kind of set the tone, right, for what the franchise is. So there's now a reference point to not only how football is played, but also great players. What is that? Is there kind of a connective tissue with, the modern players here, with guys like Tony, who, by any account was one of the best guys out there? I haven't played a guy. I played against him, and it's just like, him and Fred Taylor and, Keenan was McCardell was a teammate of mine in Cleveland. And then he went on to be just incredible in Jacksonville. And so you see, obviously Tom built a certain type of mindset, because as an expansion team, to get done what he got done in the period of time, he had a point of reference of how he wanted his teams to be.
So in being there, because I was there in 96, 97, so we make it to the AFC Championship game and fall to the Patriots, but that kind of set the foundation for the team to go on probably the most successful run that it went on in franchise history, being able to kind of go, I think, 4 straight winning seasons. They went to the AFC title game and lost to the Titans a few years later. But to me, it was very apparent that he took some of the things that he learned from the Giants. It was a big emphasis on toughness. To hear you guys talk about intelligence, that was always coveted. The types of players that you brought in. It's funny because there's this mix that you look for, I Bleav, in the NFL, where you're looking for good character guys who still have that edge to them, if it makes sense. Like good guys, they take care of business, they're smart, but when the lights come on and you cross the lines, they can go to that dark place that you need to go
Right. Right.
to be able to win games.
Hmm.
And I think that he had a keen understanding of those kinds of guys that look, the football character was great, and they had the competitive stamina and fire to be able to play and take their game up a notch when it was there. And so that fabric is still there. I would say that Doug Peterson has certainly bought into the high IQ thing.
Hmm.
And I think some people, man, I get it, but you get it. Like, a team is not necessarily a collection of the talent. It is about how the pieces of the puzzle work
Yeah.
together. And
Yeah.
sometimes you don't need to have all stars to be able to get it, but you have to have smart guys who understand how to fill in the gaps that given week. And sometimes the roles may change given the situation, but they're
Yeah.
smart enough to know that, oh, this week I need to be this kind of player for our team. And so I think that comes from Coughlin being around and understanding the team. And it also comes from Doug kind of seeing all the success in the league and knowing, oh, this is how this team needs to play to be able to win and consistently win at a high level.
Well,
Yeah,
I think
Bucky, I mean,
also,
and if you
sorry, go
just to follow up on that point, I mean, just think about the success the Patriots have had.
Mhm.
And think about some of the, I mean, some of the teams that they had tremendous success with. It wasn't when they had Moss and they set all those records in winning championships. And think about, like, Belichick figuring out that there is a role for a Kyle Van Noy or something like that, and Andy Reid has done it. He didn't do it when he had the great, all-star team in Philly. But look what he's done even in Kansas City, how they won the Super Bowl this past year. It's a collection of high IQ, strong football players that buy into whatever they're doing, right? They've used the run game in a lot.
Mhm.
Since Tyreek Hill has left, they've still won 2 Super Bowls.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So I think it kind of, all those threads all kind of tie together.
It's funny, the team building process is interesting, right? And I would say that the Giants and the Jags kind of sit in the same spot, right? 2 years ago, both teams are in the playoffs.
yeah.
Improbable playoff teams. Last year, like, things kind of got sideways, so both teams are out of the tournament. And so now there's a sense that both of these teams aren't good, but I would say that both teams are undervalued. So from your vantage point and looking at the Giants, and then I'll follow with my vantage point on the Jags, why are the Giants undervalued this year? Why would they be much better than people anticipate?
Well, we have to be honest, but I mean, they have to improve or show improvement at the offensive line position. I mean, it's the
10
the key
years.
to the failure or success at any team at any level in the NFL. If your offensive line can hold up, then you'll be able to get something done in this league because the more skilled players are on the offensive side of the football. But for the Giants, it's just, we just have to find out. Like, I'm not as concerned about the quarterback as many people are.
Mhm.
I know that he does have to be better. I know that he's got to prove a few things, but when you listen to people talk about him, you think he was a guy who literally won a coin toss and became an NFL quarterback. He has the requisite skills. You know what I mean? It wasn't like he was walking and the guy said, if you call heads or tails and you're right, you're going to be a starting quarterback. That's not how it works. That's not how the league works. So, you read some things about him and you shake your head like, no, that's not how it works. But he does have, and he'd be the first one to say he's got to play better. But the cause and effect of it that people don't want to accept. But given the last 2 drafts that they had, in terms of getting the skill positions better, and then the offseason activity that they've had on their offensive line, if they can protect the quarterback, I think you'll see the value of who they are. And again, there's only, in my estimation, and you cover this a lot more intensely, but I say there's 8 really good teams in the NFL, and the rest of them are all figuring it out.
Mhm.
And they're, 1 3-game winning streak away, or if they make it past Halloween and they're still alive, there's a path to the playoffs.
Yeah.
That's those teams. And there's maybe 6 to 8 that really know where they're going, and they're competing. They're on the cusp But the other guys, being a good to very good team or a playoff caliber team, they're all in the same boat. They're one, non-injury away to a key person, or one addition, one guy coming of age to be, and especially if you have good coaching, and I do Bleav both. And I'm a big fan of Doug Peterson because I think he's a hell of a play caller. But Brian Daboll the same way. I think both teams have really good coaches. I think they've got really good play callers. And I know you're going to get into your team, but this is the one thing that really blew my mind listening to your pod. And you talked about the 3 Ps when you were talking about the quarterback, how you evaluate the quarterback position.
Yeah, the 3
right?
Ps.
And I think
play caller, playmaker, play caller, playmaker, protectors.
Yeah.
Like anybody that's worth a salt as a young quarterback, they got to have the right play caller. They got to have the playmakers around them. And then ultimately, they have to have the offensive line and the protectors up front. If you give them those 3 things, as you talk about Daniel Jones not walking around on earth flipping a coin to be a starting quarterback, most guys, if they have a level of talent, if you have those 3 things in order, they're going to be able to play at a high level.
Yeah.
Right. And Daniel's had 3 head coaches since he's been in the league, 4 offensive coordinators because they changed in the middle of all of it during the Joe Judge, where Freddie Kitchens took over for Jason Garrett. So it's not a recipe for success. And I think with the Jags, do people not realize that they were like, heading into December, they were a win away from having control of the number 1 seed in the AFC. And then, the quarterback got banged around a little bit too much. And, the rest, as they say, is history. But, it's kind of like the Chargers in a lot of ways.
Very similar. And like all those things are true. And so when we look at those teams and we talked about it, like we can sit here and be optimistic about our teams, but really it comes down to those 3 Ps to determine whether both of the teams are going to be successful. If the play call is right, because I know Daboll, it appears, is kind of reassuming the role as the play caller. And we've seen the job that he's done with players in terms of putting them in great situations. Playmakers, they've tried to upgrade the position. Malik Neighbors is an absolute dog. I've talked to people at LSU and they talk about the competitive fire that he brings. So the Jaguars get his teammates in BTJ, who is a smooth, gifted athlete who will give them something that they haven't had in terms of a dynamic weapon on the perimeter. And then it's the protectors. Both offensive lines need to play better. They have to be able to impose their will in those gotta-have-it situations. The Jaguars could not run the football when everyone in the stadium knew they need to run it. And because of that, they had drives that prematurely ended. For the Giants, they need to be able to run the football so it's not all on Daniel Jones, and he can operate and function much like he did in 2022 when he could pick and choose when he needed to inject himself as a playmaker. So I see a lot of similarities between both franchises.
So let's have this really quick conversation because it was someone told me also we had a conversation about quarterback salaries and they think these guys are making too much money and the whole Daniel Jones salary and then Trevor just got his money and I guess people don't understand how the market for quarterbacks work, number one. But I will say to all of those folks, and you let me know, both you and Bob, let me know if you agree that, okay, if a guy makes $40 million a year and you look at where that salary ranks, if it ranks, he's the 15th or the 18th highest paid, is he playing at the level of an 18th ranked quarterback, right? Not whether or not he makes $10 or 110 million, but whatever he makes, is he there? It's just like with Brian Burns, right? He's the second highest paid defender in the league. So not the number of dollars that he just got, but is he playing at the second highest, like the second highest paid defensive lineman in the league? And the same with Trevor, which, there is no doubt in anybody's mind that he's generational talent. We've seen it live, right? And I know when the Giants played down there, I walked off the field and said, he's next. Like just watching him in clutch situations, as a non-biased person, I'm like, yo, this dude's next. He's got next because he's on the cusp of it. When you can tell when things were right, he could make plays. When things weren't right, he could still make some plays, but like you could tell why he was deemed that guy, right? So now he's making his money, and people are like, well, they gave it to him too soon. As a former player, you never can get paid too soon,
No.
right? Yeah, and I want all those guys to get as much money as they can, and do the best job that they can. But when people equate a dollar figure, like, oh, he's a 40 million, they paid him $40 million, and he's, well, it's if $40 million says he's ranked, is ranked 15th amongst quarterback salaries, or 18th, is he playing at a 15th rate, right? More so than is he playing worth 40 million? Because the numbers are going to keep going up. Nobody, in those guys' eyes, nobody's worth it. In my eyes, they're all worth as much as they can get.
It's funny because, yeah, I think the dollars have certainly reached a point where they're so astronomical that it's hard for us to say that, yeah, $40 million is a mid-level salary for a quarterback, but that's what it is. That's what it is. And we never have the same conversation about Jaylen Brown making $300 million from the Boston Celtics in basketball, because we're used to hearing and seeing those kinds of numbers. The NFL is just catching up. I think the bigger thing is not even so much what the dollar amount is the percentage that it occupies on the cap, and how your team builders go about building the team after you pay the money. Because then it becomes about, okay, we only have 5 or 6 players that we can pay significant money. It really puts an emphasis on the draft. We have to get it right on draft day to make sure that the players that we have around them, the young, cheap players, are outplaying their draft status to give us that balance on the roster that we need to be able to field a fully functional and balanced team.
Yep. And that's and it's what you do in the other rounds, right, Bucky? It's everybody gets, we got to hit, we got to draft well. Like Carl, when we were doing the 100 thing last week, as I was going through the 90s and I started introducing players up on the stage, I'm like, all right, this guy was drafted in the 2nd round out of Texas Southern, my Hall of Famer, Michael Strahan. This guy was drafted in the 2nd round out of USC, had arguably the greatest play in Giants Stadium history. Please welcome up Jason Sehorn. This guy was drafted in the 2nd round of the University of Michigan. Please welcome up Amani Toomer. This guy was drafted in the 2nd round out of Virginia. Please welcome up Tiki Barber. This guy was drafted out of the 2nd round out of Boston College. Please welcome up Chris Snead. Like, it's not all just and then some guys were 3rd rounders and some guys were 4th round. Like, that's the most imperative part, because you pay the quarterback, they're taking a big percentage of your salary, but if you're coaching up these players that you draft and their core contributors, the salary cap will go up at the time that you can renegotiate your quarterback's contract, extend out whatever, which will then you'll have more money to keep some of these guys. But if you keep swinging and missing and you go to free agency to fill all these misses, you're dead.
Yeah. And that's what it is. And so it's not only correctly identifying the players, but it's having a developmental plan to get the players on the field. And the rub that a lot of times you have between front office and coaching staff, the front office is anxiously paying attention with an eye towards the future. The coaching staff can be hanging to the past on the veteran player. And sometimes you got to get the coaches to play the young players, because the only way you learn in this league is to play. And so you have to have a system that is simple enough to integrate young players, but they also have to be ready for the responsibility. And so it's that chicken and egg debate. But Bob, you talked about it. Like, people think that, oh, it's just about the 1st round, but really your team is built on the first 3 rounds. Like, that 1st rounder needs to be a starter day 1 in a perfect world. 2nd rounder needs to be a starter by year 2. And that 3rd rounder is someone that you're hoping can be a starter somewhere in that contract to be able to get it done. And anything outside of that, man, that is gravy, because that is someone that you really didn't anticipate being a core player, but they outplay their status, and then they give you something that, man, that's a bonus. That's a bonus, baby.
Yeah, and that's why, like, those great teams Carl played on, as we were doing this 100 years and we were talking about the building blocks, when I had Parcells and Coughlin up there, was, I mean, you look at the 84, the 85, the 86, the 87, the 88 draft, and all the guys that either were contributors in Super Bowl 21 or learn the system and learn the culture that then gravitated to become Super Bowl champions and starters on the 90 team.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't all first and second rounders. I mean, it went deep into that draft and those drafts. It's harder to keep them now because there was no free agency when Carl played.
Yeah.
So now guys,
they're locked in.
They had nowhere to go.
They were locked. They were locked in. Look, man,
Poor Jeff Hostetler.
I know.
Yeah, exactly.
This was so great. It's so great, like just being able to pick two brilliant minds when it comes to football, being able to cross it over because there's so many threads, as you talked about the threads between the Jaguars.
I got one more thread you didn't mention.
What you got? What you got?
Team president Mark Lamping.
Oh, that's right.
The first president of MetLife Stadium.
How about that?
That's
and
right.
he's doing big things. He's doing big things. Just got the deal done in Jacksonville, where they're gonna do the renovations and those things to keep the Jaguars in there for the long-term future. So that is good. And then hopefully, we talk about MetLife Stadium. Hopefully we get a chance to make some trips up there because that stadium is amazing.
Yeah, man. But here's the thing also, one of my personal favorites, and I'm so happy that he's found success in Jacksonville, is Evan Engram.
Yeah.
Evan Ingram's my guy, man. I love that. That kid is, I'm just glad he's gotten a better situation so that he could really blossom in. And you could see his confidence has just blossomed, and he's in a great situation.
So let me tell you about it, because I have a quick story, because we played the Giants, not last year, but 2 years ago. Giants played the Jets up there. It was a Thursday night game. It was wet. It was windy and whatever. And evidently, it triggered him in a way, because maybe he didn't play well in bad weather for the Giants. Maybe he had some drops or whatever. But I just remember him playing in that game. One, the thing that you have to get as a player, and I think Carl can attest this, the thing that's most important, you got to have a routine in terms of your preparation process. And I'm going to tell you, I've never seen someone who is more diligent about his routine than Evan Engram. Every day before practice, he has a routine where he catches a certain amount of balls from a bunch of different angles or whatever. In terms of how he gets himself ready to play and do those things. And I would say it is really hard for players to maybe play at a high level, have some struggles, go somewhere else, and to rediscover themselves.
Yeah.
He has done that. And that is, to me, a testament of his toughness, his mental toughness, to be able to overcome, because I don't think a lot of players can kind of fall down and then get back up and have the level of success that he has had in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I think, again, that's a testament to, and I don't know all of his family, but he seems like he has a very strong structure, family structure around him. I know his sister, Dory McKenzie, is, pretty good, and they're super supportive of each other. And I know his parents were at every game, so I know he has a good solid family structure around him, and I think that's what helped him, man. But he's a guy that's never been without talent, and I'm just happy that, again, he's in an environment where he can really flourish and contribute the way that his skill set allows him to.
And he's a perfect example, and we always talk about it, and I remember talking with Coach Reeves, may he rest in peace, when we're doing our show together on Sirius, and talking about, the most important thing when you're interviewing for a head coaching job is, what's the ownership structure look like? What stability? And the Giants went through that phase, which was very un-Giant-like, of not having stability. And I think Evan Engram clearly got caught in the crosshairs. As a rookie in 2017, they had a bunch of injuries at the receiver position. So now he was expected to be the man. And then the coaching changes and the GM changes and more coaching changes. And I think he got caught in a tough spot. So there's a zillion Giant fans that root for Evan Engram. You can't be happier for that guy.
Yeah.
No, he's not only a great player, but I can tell you, man, he has emerged as one of their great leaders. And he's the kind of leader that we were talking about, like how the pieces of the puzzle fit, says what he needs to say only when he needs to say it. But a lot of his leadership is how he goes about doing his work. And so that leader by example, I think you have to have enough of those in the locker room to be able to put it together to be a championship squad.
Yeah. Well, this was fun, Bucky, man. We really appreciate
it was great, man. It was
the
great.
invite to come over.
Yeah, no, it was great, man. Look, be sure to check out your guys' podcast, Bleav in Jaguar, Bleav in Giants, Bleav in Jaguars over here. I'm looking forward to doing more crossover things. Look, make sure for both communities, we rate, review, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend as we continue to grow this thing on the Bleav
Yeah.
Network. Until next time, I'm Bucky Brooks, Bob Papa, Carl Banks. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, bro.